The Ukraine war has certainly turned to an absolute disaster for President Putin and the Russian Federation. Russia is suffering perhaps its most humiliating defeat since the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan in 1989. And history seems to repeat itself. The USSR's defeat in Afghanistan was likely a large contributor to the eventual fall of the Soviet Union just 2 years later. And a Russian defeat in Ukraine could have the same consequences for the Putin regime. Therefore, this is a place of no return. Putin cannot lose this war. It's not optional. There can be no tolerance for surrender. And because of the desperate situation Putin is in, it is unlikely that the war will end anytime soon. Even if the Russians are getting beat on the field, they will likely grind on. But in this video, we will be discussing how Russia could win the war in Ukraine and what critical steps they can implement right now to save their current disastrous military state. I'm telling you folks, this video is going to be interesting. Before we jump into this video, stop this video right now and subscribe to our channel. That way you're not missing out on any new updates we have coming at you, and you'll avoid the fake news of modern media. Now without further ado, let's jump into this video. After their glorious victory at Kyiv and their great victory in Kherson, Ukrainian forces are on a victorious roll. The Ukrainians can feel like victory is within their grasp. The morale of the Ukrainian people is likely higher than ever, and the same for the army. While the Russian army is in a polar opposite situation. Their morale is likely weakening, and for some of the conscripts, it's probably collapsing. Their forces are seriously outnumbered by the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians have better weapons than they do. And yet, while being outnumbered, they must go on the offensive to avoid a humiliating defeat. Now, as I said previously in this video, this is a must for the Putin regime. That's the thing people have to get. This is a must. He cannot lose this war. Therefore, it is likely that Putin will do everything in his power to avoid losing this war. On September 21st, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a partial mobilization of the military reserves in Russia. And this huge mobilization of 300,000 men has allegedly been completed. However, even when Russia sends these additional 300,000 reserves into Ukraine, it is highly unlikely to change the tide of the war because they will still be severely outnumbered. Now, let's be clear. The initial thrust of Russian soldiers in Ukraine included up to 190,000 Russian troops, along with 20,000 troops from the so-called Donetsk People's Republic and 14,000 from the so-called Luhansk People's Republic. That is a total force of around 224,000 personnel. But we have to keep in mind that up to 20,000 foreign volunteers came to the aid of Russia later on in the war. That would bring Russia's troop number up to around 244,000 personnel. And as the war began to worsen for Russia, the Russian government resorted to recruiting prisoners. Many people say up to 20,000. That'll bring the Russian troop number up to 264,000, plus about 8,000 members of the so-called PMC Wagner group. That'll bring the Russian number up to 272,000. Now bear with me, these numbers are important. And then we also must keep in mind that there are likely Syrian soldiers helping the Russian military in Ukraine. So roughly around 300,000 personnel have participated in Russia's special military operation. However, this amount of men is not doing the trick. Ukraine allegedly has 1 million mobilized personnel. Anytime Ukraine can mobilize more and more men, they are fighting at their own country, meaning the men that Ukraine can mobilize will likely have a much higher morale and will be much more willing to serve. So even with Russia's additional 300,000 reserves that they're sending into Ukraine, this is highly unlikely to win the war for Russia. It's not enough personnel, with the Pentagon estimating that Russia lost around 100,000 casualties. Russia will definitely be outnumbered. But here are 3 things Russia could do, which would almost certainly win the war for them. Number 1, full economic mobilization. One of the major problems Russia is having with this war is not enough economic funding. While Ukraine is getting billions of dollars from the West, Russia is not funding their military machine enough. Therefore, their military equipment is being obliterated and they do not have enough economic muscle invested into the special military operation to provide a legitimate victory. They need full economic mobilization immediately. If you look at World War II, during Operation Barbarossa, the Soviet Union was in a fight for its life and everything was mobilized. The economy, the manpower, everything was mobilized for this war. Why? Because they were in a fight for their life. And Putin's regime and today's Russia are in a seemingly fight for their life as well. Many people say if Russia called for full mobilization, it's a sign that they've been defeated on the battlefield. Well, yeah, duh, they're severely outnumbered by the Ukrainian forces and the Ukrainians are getting billions upon billions of dollars of Western aid. So for Russia not to call for full economic mobilization simply doesn't make sense because the economy is so vital to any military operations. The second thing Russia could do is call for full mobilization. Let me explain what I mean by that. To generate enough manpower into the special military operation, Russia will have to call much more than just 300,000 troops. For that, Russia could call for full mobilization. According to Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, Russia had 25 million potential fighters at its disposal. Now, granted, this is the Russian Defense Minister, and he's likely over-exaggerating just a bit. But even if we were to have this number, that's still 12.5 million potential fighters. And if these men were to be called up into military service, it would certainly be a game changer in the Ukraine war. The economy would then work to support that, and billions of dollars could be allocated to the equipping of the millions of potential fighters. Even if their troops were of good quality, the sheer overwhelming manpower would crush the Ukrainian military. and it would likely discourage NATO from actually getting involved. After all, no country is trying to get in a war with millions upon millions of mobilized troops. Number 3, broaden the assault. Right now, the West is sending aid to Ukraine by the billions, but if Russia were to broaden the assault, that could change. What do I mean by broaden the assault? Now, prepare for this one. Invade another country. That sounds insane and self-defeating, but it really isn't. If Russia were to take, let's say, the 300,000 mobilized reserves and send at least 100,000 of those guys into a country like Georgia, they would likely easily crush the Georgian military, and that would also likely distract the West, at least partially, from the situation going on in Ukraine. One thing Russia would have to be careful about in this situation is an invasion of another country such as Georgia may give the West the perfect casus belli it needs to join the war against Russia. That's why it would be critical to mobilize millions upon millions of troops and mobilize the Russian economy in an attempt to discourage the West from intervening. I mean, from what we've seen of Biden and the EU's leaders' responses, it's highly unlikely they're going to be down with going to fight millions upon millions of Russian soldiers. Plus, an economically mobilized Russia, and if Ukraine were to lose, they would probably just take the L. Those are 3 things Russia could do to win this war. In theory, these 3 decisions could be game changers in the Ukraine war. If you enjoy this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, that way you're not missing out on any new content we have coming at you. Hit that notification bell, that way you'll be notified when new videos come out. Share this video with a friend. God bless, and I'll catch you next time.